You are listening to Mystery Media Group.
People celebrate Christmas Day in many ways. It is often combined with customs from pre Christian winter celebrations. Many people decorate their homes, visit family or friends, and exchange gifts. Many also do charitable work and help others in need. We here at Destination Mystery would like to bring you a few positively paranormal Christmas stories for you to enjoy over the Christmas season.
This week, we thought we would do something a little Christmassy for you. My wife saves these stories, and we've saved stories from years past, that ones that we've always really enjoyed and have had meaning in our lives. This is a really old one. But it was written by a woman named Joanne Wester Anderson. Hope she doesn't mind us sharing the story. This story is called The Heavenly Farmhands. And I'd like to share this story because it goes along with an experience we had this last summer when we picked up my son from his mission. So we'll share that, and then my lovely wife, Michelle, from Time for God, is going to share a story, and then my daughter from Paranormal Teens is going to share a story. So this is called The Heavenly Farmhands. The after-Christmas snowstorm had blanketed a wide patch of rural Pennsylvania, and Chris probably should have waited until the roads were plowed before she, her mother, and her two small sons attempted to drive. But Chris's grandmother lived alone more than 100 miles away and couldn't get out to the store to buy her groceries. "We'll be fine," Chris assured her mother. "We'll take that shortcut that we use all summer." However, Chris had forgotten how narrow the shortcut road was, especially with drifts piled high and wind blowing snow across the fields. When another vehicle roared around a curve, Chris swerved and skidded into the snowbank. The other car kept going. Now, that rings true to us because we spent an awful lot of time stuck, because we grew up where there was lots and lots of snow, and we spent a great deal of time stuck. The wheel spun uselessly as she tried to pull out. "Mommy, are we stuck?" Philip asked from under his blanket in the back seat. "It looks that way, honey," Chris admitted. They had only seen that one other car since they turned onto the shortcut. How long would it be before someone came along? How long before the freezing temperature invaded the car's interior? And why, oh why, had she worn stylish open shoes instead of warm boots? Chris got out, her almost bare feet plunging into a high drift, and looked around. "Lord, please send us some help," she prayed. Then she saw it, a silo and barn roof about a quarter mile away. "Mom," Chris leaned in the car and said, "I'll walk down to that barn and see if anyone's there. Keep the kids warm." The journey was cold, incredibly cold, and by the time Chris pushed open the barn door, her feet were icy. A welcome blast of heat greeted her, along with a million of heifers in their stalls. It was a working dairy, clean and well organized, with the shanty window fans circulating the air. Even better, Chris heard a young male voices coming from behind a stall. Maneuvering on the animals, Chris followed the sound and came upon two farmhands in overalls and flannel shirts, kidding and teasing each other. They stopped and smiled when they saw her, and she quickly explained the situation. "Stay here," he said, tramping past the cows and out the door. A few minutes later, Chris heard a horn honking in front of the barn. There he was, driving a blue pickup truck. "Get in," he shouted. Chris hesitated. She didn't know these men, yet there was something so merry about them that she couldn't feel afraid. She and the other farmhands scrambled into the truck and bounced down the road. There was the car, her toddlers bundled up and Mom waving. The driver veered across the field, spun in a wide circle, and screeched into position behind it. He's probably spinning cookies, because that's what I usually do, and that's why I usually end up getting stuck. Chris gripped the seat. You always drive like this?" she said, only half joking. The driver shrugged. "Well, it ain't our truck." Within minutes, the men had freed Chris's car, and she opened her purse to reward them, but both backed away. "It was our pleasure, ma'am. Just drive safely." "Not like you," Chris grinned as she pulled away, but they had been wonderful guys. Chris didn't realize just how wonderful until 2 weeks later when she and her mother decided to make a return visit to her grandmother. Since the snow was almost gone by then, the shortcut was safer. When we get to the barn, I'd like to stop and let the guys know we made it to Grandma's that day, Chris told her mother. When they pulled up in front of to where Chris had climbed into the blue truck, she could hardly believe her eyes. The barn was vacant, shabby, with peeling paint and doors hanging loose. Bewildered, Chris wiped away a heavy film of dirt and cobwebs on the windows and peered inside. Where were the heifers? The floors lined with manure. Where was the fan? They couldn't have seen any farmhands or cattle here, the woman at the next house told Chris. No one's worked that farm for years. Chris got in the car. Am I crazy, Mom? She asked. No, her mother was firm. This is definitely the place. Then how? Chris suddenly understood, and like the shepherds at the first Christmas, she was filled with awe. Her angels had worn blue jeans and flannel shirts instead of white robes, but they delivered the same timeless message to her and to anyone willing to listen. Fear not, the Savior is here. Hallelujah. Growing up, we had multiple times where we were stuck or in need of something and somebody came along. They weren't wearing the white robes. They're usually in overalls and flannel shirts. And that reminded me of last summer, or the summer before, my son is serving a mission for our church, and we went to Washington. He was on the Ensign Ranch there in Washington. And on our way up there, we stopped at a rest area, and there was a car there, a really old car with an old couple in it, and they had a sign on it, their car, asking for money and for gas and food. And we pulled in, used the restroom, came out, and we took out some sandwiches and chips and water, and I had a $5 bill on me, so we took it over there. And I was going to show my girls, teach them a little lesson about helping out when needed. And we got there, and the old lady was playing on a cell phone, a nice iPhone. And I thought, what the heck, if you have an iPhone, why are you needing this? Why are you begging? But I let it go, and I'm going to show my girls. I'm going to try and set an example. So we gave it to her, and she was very appreciative, and we felt pretty good about it. We were on our way. We went to Washington, did our thing. And on our way home, we didn't have much gas in the car. And I don't like to start off a trip, get in the car, drive 10 minutes, get out again. So I said, let's just drive an hour or two, and then we'll get gas. Because we're going to have to go to the bathroom and get something to drink anyway. So let's just wait till then so we can get some distance behind us. But we were sightseeing and not paying attention, and pretty quick we're in the country. And we drove and we drove and we drove. And we still never couldn't find a gas station. I couldn't believe we drove that far and not seen a gas station. We drove through several little communities and couldn't find a gas station. And there's a gas station here, and we drive there, and there wasn't one. We just kept going and going. Pretty quick, the light comes on in the car. Crap, we were out of gas. And finally, the car, and it dies. We pull off to the side of the road, and there's houses in the distance, but nobody very close. And the town seemed to be about 1.5 miles, 2 miles away, but I didn't have a gas can. And we said a little prayer. I didn't even get out of the car down the road like 10 steps, and this guy pulls up behind us wearing blue overalls. I don't even think he had a shirt on, but he had blue overalls on. And he's like, what can I do for you? And I'm like, well, we ran out of gas. Oh, well, heck, I can take care of that. And reaches in the bag, pulls out his gas can, and fills our tank. And he didn't judge us at all, because we had a newer car. We had money in our pockets. Each of us had a cell phone, and probably each of us had an iPad. But what we did not have was gas. And he didn't question anything. He just put the gas in the tank. I tried to give him some money. He wouldn't take it. And he said, just pay it forward. And what an example this man set, because we had everything we needed, but what we didn't have was gas. And so I thought that was a pretty good thing for him to do.
I'm Michelle with Time Forgot, and I am going to share a local Christmas story that was given to me by one of my neighbors. It's about her ancestors, and she calls it the Christmas story. In the early 1900s, my great-grandparents homesteaded what is called Burns Creek, which is about 15 miles above High C Hot Springs. My great-grandfather, Carl, was a ruffle trapper who had lived in the wilds all his life. My great-grandmother, Bess, was a school teacher who had been sent to marry Carl by her father, who was a fur and hide buyer who had dealt with Carl throughout the years. We found my great-grandmother's journal, which contained the following entry written the week before Christmas. My great-grandmother was 24 years old and pregnant with her 4th child. It was a hard and lonely life, and the winters in Burns Creek were long and lonely. She wrote that it was the week before Christmas, and Carl had promised her that he would take his furs and hides to the valley to sell them and bring home some things she hoped he could find for the children for Christmas. On her list were peppermint, chocolate, and a piece of yard goods for a dress for her baby girl. Carl told her he would stop and cut down a pine tree on the way back home. He left 3 days before Christmas to go to the valley. He left her plenty of chopped wood for the fire, and she only had to go out to the barn to milk the cow. She wrote that the night of the first day that Carl was away, a terrible blizzard hit, and it snowed and blew all night. The next morning, when she opened the door, she found a drift of ice and snow surrounding the whole front of the cabin. She took an axe and chopped through the enormous drift. She tied a rope around her waist and one to the doorpost and tried to cross the yard to the barn to milk the cow. She had only gone a few feet when the snow became too deep and heavy to continue on. She was with child, she wrote, and was afraid of harming the baby. She went back to the house and prayed that they would be all right until Carl returned. She wrote that she entertained her 2 little boys and baby girl by making chains for the Christmas tree their father would bring home. The children grew restless on Christmas Eve when their father had not returned. As the hour grew late, she wrote her heart was heavy and she felt something had happened to Carl, or he would have been home before dark. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. The children flew to the door and opened it, prepared to see their father. But, Bess wrote, her heart sank with fear. There before her stood the ugliest, dirtiest old trapper she had ever seen. But to 3 small children on Christmas Eve, an old man with a white beard, a pack, and carrying a Christmas tree was welcomed into their home. The old trapper looked at her and told her not to be afraid. He told her Carl had trouble with the lame pack horse and had stayed an extra night at the trapper's lodge, which was halfway between the valley and Burns Creek. He told her Carl would be home early in the morning, but that he had asked the old trapper if he would mind the pack and tree to Bess and the children on his way up on the trapping line. He told Bess to look inside the pack and see what Carl had bought in town. She was delighted. There was peppermint, chocolate, and a beautiful piece of yard goods, enough to make herself and her little girl a dress. She fed the trapper a bowl of stew, and he set up the Christmas tree and helped them decorate it. The children fell asleep at his feet as he recited the nativity story to them. He helped Bess tuck them all into the same bed and put the meager gifts under the tree. Carl was an excellent wood carver and had made a doll for his daughter and a beautiful team of horses and sleigh for his 2 sons. The trapper asked Bess if it would be all right if he spent the night in the barn after he milked the cow and brought in more wood. He told her he would be off in the morning to check his trap lines. She told him that would be fine and thanked him for helping Carl deliver their Christmas things, as not to disappoint the children. The next morning, the children were delighted with their finds underneath the tree. She wondered why the old trapper had not come in to share breakfast as he agreed to, as she was caught up in the children's excitement and did not give it much thought. Soon she saw Carl riding over the hill and into the yard. The children greeted their father with shouts of happiness. They quickly told him that Santa Claus had spent the night in their barn with the cows and horses. Bess wrote Carl looked perplexed. He sent the children into the house. He turned to Bess and asked her just who was in the barn. She told him it was the old trapper he had sent with the tree and Christmas things from town. Carl rubbed his chin, as he always did, and then told her that he had not sent anyone, that he had not made it to the valley at all. On his way down, he had stopped at the trapper's lodge to water his horses and warm himself. When he took his horses down to the river, an old trapper had fallen through the mush ice, and Carl and 2 young trappers pulled him out. Carl could see that the old man was in bad shape and would not make it through the night. The other 2 young men were in a hurry to get to the valley and back home for Christmas Eve. Carl told them to go to their families and he would stay with the old man. He told Bess that he couldn't leave the old man there alone to die. He told her he knew the children would be disappointed, but that they would have many more Christmas Eves to spend together. He said he just sat there with the old man and told him about Bess and his family. He told them about what they wanted from the valley and what the children were getting for Christmas. He told the old man how much he loved his family and that he never thought he would have a family of his own. Just before the old trapper died, he looked into his eyes and thanked him for staying with him on Christmas Eve. He then passed away quietly. He had no family, and no one even cared that he had died. Then she knew there was no one in the barn. She wrote that her eyes spilled over with tears of joy and sadness. Sadness for the old trapper who died, and joy at knowing in her heart that the Lord had sent an angel in the form of a scraggly, dirty old trapper to her family on Christmas Eve, because of that unselfish, unconditional love that Carl had shown a dying old man on that holiest of nights. She wrote that she had the honor of entertaining an angel in her humble home. So as we go about this holiday season, may we be more caring, patient, and kind, and be less hurried or judgmental, for we never know when it may be our choice test to entertain an angel.
This is Sierra from Paranormal Teens, and today I'll be sharing one of my favorite Christmas stories. It is called God's Sweet Messenger. Christmas was still a long way off when Lori Pazeke's dad became ill. Her mother rented a wheelchair and insisted on caring for him at home. Dad was still very energetic, Lori says. We hoped he would have the strength to get well and spend many more holidays with us. Lori's father had built the house the elderly couple lived in. It was on the edge of a field bordered with pine trees. And although there was always animals around, during the 20 years they had lived in the house, they had only seen deer twice, Lori recalls. It was odd, since the woods seemed like a perfect place for deer to live. Now as his world grew smaller, Lori's father stayed in his wheelchair, looking out the dining room's sliding glass doors. Once his wife asked, "Wouldn't you like to sit in the living room so you can watch the cars go by and wave to our neighbors?" "No, I'd rather sit here and look for the animals," he replied. "Maybe I'll finally see one." When Lori's mother told her about the conversation, Lori went home and prayed. "I asked God to let my dad see a deer, the most tranquil of all animals, while he was sitting in that wheelchair," she says. "I was very specific about it. When no deer appeared, Lori amended her prayer. 'Okay, God,' she said. 'How about any animal? A raccoon, a possum, or even the neighbor's cat? You know how much this would mean to my dad.'" Nothing happened, and eventually Lori's father was confined to his bed. It was clear that her father wasn't going to see any animals or celebrate another Christmas. Lori prayed, but now she was angry. "God, I know I'm not supposed to question my faith, but I'm having a hard time." Would she have to wait until her father died? Would God send her a sign to let her know that her dad was safe with him? Not long after, Lori's father died just before dawn one morning. An hour later, Lori and most of her 7 brothers and sisters had assembled in the house, weeping or lost in a daze. Life would never be the same for any of them. Was Dad in heaven? How would they even know? Suddenly, one of Lori's brothers looked out the sliding glass doors. "Hey, everybody, come out here," he called. Lori and the others went to the window. Standing in the backyard, maybe 20 feet away, were 10 or 11 deer, Lori recalls. None of us had seen them approach. The animals stood motionless, facing the house. For a moment, they looked calmly at the hushed family. Then, as if their mission had been accomplished, they turned in unison and bounded away. No one had seen the mysterious herd since. But whenever I am missing my dad, I remember the morning, and it always eases my mind, says Lori. She knows without a doubt that her father celebrates Christmas every day.
We hope you enjoyed our positively paranormal Christmas stories, and have a Merry Christmas.
So, from our weird family to yours, we hope everybody has a merry and happy holiday. And until next time, find your own destination
And solve the mystery.
This is a production of Mystery Media Group.
Yay!